Welcome back to Stadium Hot Dog. This series, Archie's Football Grounds of London, will be based on the Scottish engineer Archibald Leach and how pivotal his football grounds were to the development, histories as well as identities of the football clubs that he worked with during the early 20th century. In 1908, Tottenham Hotspur were selected to be a part of the Football League for the first time after Stoke City dropped out. John Cameron, their Scottish secretary-manager, joined the club in 1899, the first season Spurs played at White Hart Lane. Cameron led Spurs to be the first and only non-league club to win the FA Cup in 1901. That same year, the club bought the ground from Charrington Brewers, who owned the adjacent White Hart Inn on Tottenham High Road. However, the ground wasn't immediately known as White Hart Lane. It was first known as the High Road Ground colloquially. Other options were to name it Percy Park, Chapman Park or Gilpin Park. It all came down to convenience in the end to name it as White Hart Lane, even though it was on the opposite side of the high road where a railway station carries the name to this day. Also, it's more than likely that as the ground was down the lane of the White Hart pub, this had an obvious input. Not concrete, however, I'm sure a collection of these influences had a part to play. The capacity of the ground grew to 40,000, decent for a Southern League club at the time, however, not so for a Football League club going into the 20th century. Cameron would develop a bond with Archibald Leach, and in turn Leach's company worked with Spurs from 1908 to 1934, designing stands and redeveloping the terracing on all four sides of White Hart Lane. The lane epitomised an Archibald Leach football ground, as shown in this illustration. The east stand in the foreground was one of the most iconic of Leach's stands. The brickwork from the east stand was crushed as an aggregate and used as part of the concourse flooring in the new south stand at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Tottenham were the first club to build substantial terraces at both ends of a football ground. In 1909, Leach continued expanding the ground with the completion of all four sides into concrete terracing. The total capacity in 1911 reached 50,000. 10 years later, in 1921, profits from Spurs' FA Cup win went into building a roof over the Paxton Road end, the North Stand, and in 1923 a near enough identical roof over the Park Lane end, the South Stand. As shown in this image from the 1920s, the East Stand was closed in by a row of terraced houses. The club bought properties and rehoused tenants as well as compensated others. The cost totalled £5,000 and Spurs were given the green light to go ahead with the demolition in 1934, which would pave the way for Leach's last stand at White Hart Lane. From these images in 1959 and 1985, the two features that made the East Stand unique among Leach's other double-decker stands was the provision of a mid-terrace. This became known as the shelf side and a crow's nest press box. The stand consisted of 4,983 seats on the upper tier and a standing room for 13,349. This brought the total capacity of White Hart Lane up to 75,000. The 1960s saw the first alterations to Leach's work with the installation of seating in the rear sections of both the north and south stands. The capacity was reduced to 60,000. The West Stand was replaced in 1982 and the capacity was then 48,200. The then board were wanting a more upmarket clientele, with 72 executive boxes installed, more than any other ground in Britain at the time. A new roof was installed on the East Stand in 1989, more executive boxes and seats on the shelf side. In the 1990s, both North and South stands were redeveloped and the East lower terrace was seated. The capacity of the ground was now 36,237, half the peak Leach capacity. Just like at the start of the 20th century, Spurs outgrew their home. The capacity of White Hart Lane was far too small for a 21st century Premier League club who had aspirations with Champions League football. With the demolition of the old White Hart Lane, Leach of all people would have fully understood the need for expansion and been impressed with the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Leech shared a passion for modern-day facilities that brought him to the lane back in 1908, and this has most certainly been replicated with the colossal stadium which took its place. Thank you for tuning in to Stadium Hot Dog. Please like, subscribe and spread the word. Also, please share your thoughts and memories and let me know what you think. Catch you next time.